And coming up on this week's show, Virgin Trains is denied a return to the West Coast Main Line, but in a big shock, so has everybody else. HS1 is judged poor value for money. Yes, HS1. But have all the benefits been fully accounted for? And an Avanti West Coast Pendolino hits the buffers at Euston. Welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and...
from me, Richard Bowker.
And off we go, straight into it. We start with the big news that the ORR has rejected not one, but all three of the open access applications that have been made for new services on the West Coast Main Line, even including the one that the DfT had supported in principle. The whole process seems to have triggered quite a spat between the DfT and the ORR, which we will look at shortly. But first, let's remind ourselves what those applications actually were. They were East Coast Trains Limited, Lumo Northwest, 6 daily return services, Monday to Saturday, 5 on a Sunday, from London Euston to Rochdale, a 10-year contract using new build hybrid stock. Second, Wrexham, Shropshire and Midlands Railway Company, or WCML, 5 daily return services Monday to Saturday with 4 on a Sunday from London Euston to Wrexham General via Shrewsbury. A 7-year contract using trains no less capable than Class 222 Meridians. And finally, Virgin Trains, a large quantum of rights requested comprising 3 service groups. And like WCML, using trains no less capable than 222s. And they are Group 1, Euston to Preston via Manchester Victoria, 5 daily services, and Euston to Rochdale via Manvic, 2 daily services. Group 2, Euston to Liverpool Lime Street, 9 daily services, and Group 3, Euston to Birmingham New Street with 4 daily services. Blimey, that's a hell of a lot of potential access rights, Richard. So, tell us what ORR said. Apart from no, we know that.
Well, their decision is set out in a 13-page letter, and it's fair to say it is packed with detail. Now, there's the usual stuff at the beginning about their statutory duties, although they they say that every time, and that's fair enough. Though they do make the point that one of them is to promote competition. They do in the provision of railway services, which is still the law until it changes. I suppose if it changes. They also set out the views they'd received from stakeholders for each application. Now, they are interested.
They were,
so
weren't they?
Stakeholders, anybody who kind of got a view, right? And for each one of those 3 that you mentioned, Lumo, Wrexham and Virgin, they say that Transport Focus were supportive more generally, okay? But then they list all the people who are against them. So, for example, on Virgin, they say, we received unsupportive comments from a combination of public service train operators, freight operators, competing open access operators, regional transport authorities, devolved authorities, and passenger groups. Their concerns included capacity, performance, impact of the proposals on operators' own plans, economic concerns, station access, station safety, rolling stock concerns, interaction with HS2, and the delivery of future services.
And that's without, Richard, including the DfT's significant concerns about both taxpayer and operational impacts of this application, because they apparently had told the ORR that this application would have an unacceptable level of impact on taxpayers given the greatly constrained overall position of rail finances, and that the loss of revenue on such a significant scale would materially impact the funds available to the Secretary of State to support and improve the railway.
Yeah, but what's interesting in this decision on all 3 is that the ORR specifically say they've not needed to take account of the financial impacts, and our good friend that we often have to talk about called abstraction or indirect subsidy. Why? Because the applications were rejected solely on the basis of a lack of capacity and a fear of a detrimental impact on performance. So it was just about capacity and performance. Money on this occasion had no bearing.
Which seems to me to have caused some real friction, Richard, with the DfT. The ORR refers to the letter from Richard Goodman, sent to the chair of the ORR on June the 20th, in which Mr. Goodman stressed for the DFT the need for ORR to, quote, take steps to fully understand and consider the cumulative scale and impacts of abstraction when it assesses open access applications.
Yeah, but that point gets sort of swatted away, doesn't it?
Swatted is the right word.
Yeah, by the ORR in their decision letter, because they say much of the letter, the one that you're just talking about there, much of the letter reiterated the department's previously stated position with regard to open access, which I read as, in other words, thanks, but we actually understood it the first time. We're not thick.
Yes, that's what came across to me too.
Now, interestingly, the ORR then referred to a follow-up email, which they must have got sent after the letter from Mr. Goodman, the 20th of June, of the 23rd of June, which I've not seen, and in which the ORR say, well, it provided partial clarifications, and apparently included this phrase: DFT is aware that ORR considers the impact on Secretary of State funds when making decisions, but we're not aware of a formal statement of how it does this. And later on, again from the DFT, and that it would be helpful to set out a means of doing this in the future. So in other words, we know you say you take account of it. We're not actually sure how you do that, ORR.
And we want to see your workings out.
Well, there's a bit of that, isn't there? So ORR then say in their decision letter, this 13-pager where they say no to everything, our board considered both the letter and the email from the DFT at its meeting on the 24th of June 2025. I love this. It concluded that neither was a relevant consideration, given the board accepted the factors of capacity and performance were determinative in each application. In particular, the board did not have cause at any stage in its discussion to consider its duty relating to the funds available to the Secretary of State. So, it's quite the public spat, really.
Well, it's a bit like you used to get on your homework, wasn't it, where the teacher would write irrelevant in red in the margin. And they're effectively saying, oh, be off with you with your financial worries. They're not relevant here anyway. So what did convince the ORR that there was insufficient capacity then?
Well, in summary, the ORR agreed with Network Rail that the capacity does not exist, or more accurate, I suppose, if it does, that it's kind of theoretical rather than practical and therefore should not be used. And that's quite apart from the fact that even if the ORR had accepted that theoretical capacity did exist and could be used, there wasn't enough to fulfill all these applications anyway. But it's a moot point because ORR, on this occasion, agree with Network Rail. It's just not there. And to all practical intents and purposes, from a day-to-day operational point of view, the West Coast Main Line South is full.
Indeed, and I see from the decision letter that the restructured timetable of 2022 unlocked an additional hourly path to Liverpool, which AWC have contingent rights for, as well as 5 paths a day for what is now going to be Lumo's service to Stirling. So, according to my maths, that left 9 theoretical paths, which now act as firebrake paths. And I'm presuming a white space firebrake path does exactly what it says on the tin, Richard.
Yeah, it is. Now, so fire breaks are planned gaps or unused space in the timetable, and what perhaps we used to call, I would still call, white space. Now, ORR say Network Rail provided clear evidence that these fire breaks are frequently used to manage service recovery during periods of disruption. And on a bad day, the planned white space or fire breaks is almost completely eroded, i.e. it's occupied. And the ORR said, we agree with the view that fire breaks can play an important role in creating a robust and resilient schedule, especially on congested or high-frequency routes such as the West Coast Main Line. Now, we should also note, when we're talking about this, Nigel, that the ORR's decision also took account of some serious power supply concerns on other parts of the West Coast. And the ORR went on to say, we agree that there are various power supply issues across the route and that these concerns will remain until, as yet, unfunded mitigations are implemented Until then, we do not consider it reasonable for ORR to support the inclusion of additional electric traction at certain times of the day as proposed in these applications.
Well, like you, I think I agree with all that. And the West Coast Main Line was always described to me as the busiest mixed traffic railway in Europe, south of Rugby, and that gives context, doesn't it? The reaction to the ORR's decision has been fairly predictable. We asked Virgin, for instance, if they would like to come on the show to discuss this. Guess what? They declined, but they did give us a statement which included this. Today's decision is a blow for consumer choice and competition. We still believe that given the opportunity, Virgin's open access routes could play a valuable role in delivering the high-quality train services the British public deserve and that GBR wants to encourage. Virgin Trains took the West Coast Main Line from 8 million to 42 million passengers a year, all while increasing innovation, topping customer satisfaction surveys and trebling services. Anyone who remembers British Rail would rather forget it. Competition improves services, increases rail ridership, and drives better results for everyone, including the taxpayer. I thought the swipe at BR was a bit unnecessary, Richard.
It was a bit, wasn't it? What was also interesting was that the Virgin statement didn't say anything about whether they agreed or disagreed with the ORR's view on capacity. So we asked a follow-up, and Virgin said 9 paths in each direction were identified as being available last year when operators were invited to apply for access in May 2024. If these paths weren't available, operators wouldn't have been invited to apply. Network Rail has since said that these gaps in the timetable are needed as fire breaks to address the punctuality of services on the line. Well, the first point, I think, is just a little bit naive, if in fact they believe that. The ORR did not make that invitation to apply for access, knowing in detail what was or was not available, I'm sure. And I'm fairly confident Network Rail have never really felt or agreed that it was. So I think that's all a bit simplistic, really, to be honest.
So we thought we'd better ask the opinion of someone who has forgotten more about train operations than just about anyone else and has a good understanding of the West Coast Main Line in particular. Richard successfully managed to grab a few minutes with a newly honoured Chris Green. Was it an OBE or an MBE, Richard?
OBE.
OBE, Chris Green, OBE. Former MD of Intercity under British Rail and, of course, Chief Executive of the Virgin Rail Group. This is what he said.
Absolutely delighted to welcome Chris Green to Green Signals. Welcome, Chris. It's super to have you on the show. Am I right in saying that when you were operating this particular line, of course, first as Intercity, then as Virgin, you actually had a rule of thumb as to how you actually managed capacity yourselves? Just kind of walk us through that process.
Well, when you get very busy main lines, trying to run a train every 3 minutes, sooner or later you have to have a fire break, which means no trains in one slot, just so that you can recover. And you need a spare platform at Euston, and you need a spare platform at Birmingham for when things go wrong. If someone comes along and says, that's spare capacity, we want to run a train in it, you've wrecked everyone's performance on the line because things do go wrong, and you will get domino delays, which will hit everyone.
And is that akin to saying there's a difference between maximum theoretical capacity and maximum pragmatic capacity from an operational point of view?
Spot on. So in both Intercity and Virgin days, we deliberately gave up one slot every half hour rather than run a railway that didn't perform well.
Which does make sense. And actually, when you look at what the ORR said in their letter, they say this. They say, Network Rail's West Coast Main Line South Congested Infrastructure Report, it's a bit of a mouthful, in 2020 concluded that no significant additional capacity could be utilised between Camden South and Ledburn without harming performance. I mean, that does sounds to me sort of pretty kind of definitive, really.
Yes, I think since my Intercity days, we're running something like double the number of trains into Euston up and down the West Coast, and any commuter can see that the moment something goes wrong, you get this domino delay of trains, which will only become worse if you add another 23 trains a day to it. So it's just a sad fact that we are pretty full up on the West Coast, and it would be wrong at this stage in time to put more trains into it, in my opinion. 30 years ago, we went into rail privatisation and we said, whatever else we do, we're going to have a stable performance through this period and we're not going to make big changes. We're now doing exactly the same 30 years later, and it is going to be extremely difficult to take all these fragmented bits of the railway, sew them together, and create a national organisation and a timetable for them. So this is not the time to be adding extra trains to a very crowded railway.
But is it not also true, perhaps, Network Rail might be just trying to make their life a little bit easier for themselves, not being sort of disrespectful of them, but, they've got, there's a lot of pressure on that bit of railway.
Not on the West Coast. I think every commuter on the West Coast can see the problem, and I've been commuting on it for 35 years. It is extremely tight. And the moment something goes wrong, you get a long line of trains stuck, which means everyone's connections are broken, everyone's reservations are broken, and the whole railway becomes unreliable.
However, Avanti West Coast don't have the most, the best public profile sometimes, let's put it that way. And Virgin Trains did have, certainly at the end, an extremely high reputation for delivering excellent service. Are we not running the risk of actually denying passengers on the route who are frustrated from time to time when things, well, fairly regular, I guess, are we denying them a genuine choice?
I guess at the margin we are, but I'm suggesting that reliability of performance on a crowded railway should trump the risk of taking a competitive view on this for the next 3 years.
And we think it could take that time, because one of the suggestions that's been made is that, and you alluded to it there, putting back this fragmented industry, that the people, both in the operational units and the infrastructure units, probably need a bit of time to kind of remember how to do it together. Is that a fair assessment, or oversimplifying it?
No, it's a fair assessment. With privatization 30 years ago, it was difficult, and that was with a very experienced railway team who'd had lots of knowledge of the rest of the railway. Now we're doing it with a fragmented railway team who only know about their part of the railway, and we are short, I think, of people who can really take the big view and get this to work. So don't underestimate the risks we're taking in the next 3 years to get performance right in the middle of all this.
Can I ask you one very final question? Because it's not often we get Chris Green on the show, but it's a very specific thing relating to West Coast. One of the things that's often said today is that on the West Coast, as soon as there's a problem, they not quite give up, but they sort of stop trying to fix it operationally, and buses become too quick, and we've lost diversionary route knowledge and capability. Whereas on the East Coast, David Horn and his team at L&E are often lauded for the fact they do keep diversionary route knowledge up. They do find a way around the problem. Is that something that you observe, or do you think that's just probably a bit?
No, I think that's a little bit unfair. So the southern end is 4 very busy tracks, and if you've got a blockage, the quickest thing to do is to turn trains back, bus people, and solve the problem. The north, we've got some very good diversion routes which have been electrified. You can go via Northampton, you can go via Birmingham, you can go via Star Valley, you can go via Manchester, you can go via Wigan nowadays. So plenty of electric diversions. And the only place it becomes a problem, I would suggest, is north of Preston, where you've got the Settle Carlisle route, which would need a diesel for the diversions. But I think West Coast is quite well served for diversions now, and most drivers know most routes.
Okay. It's just one of those things that does come up from time to time. And no doubt when work on the trialling project, which is looking at rewiring, I know north of Preston dealing with that section of it, that's something that will come very much to the fore. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that in due course. Chris, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us. And let's see how it goes now in terms of GBR. It's going to be a challenging few years ahead for sure.
Yeah. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you very much.
There you go, Richard. I need to ask a question here. This might be memory playing tricks on me. When you and I first knew each other, at about the time that Chris Garnett was doing very hard work to stop open access operators stopping anywhere south of Grantham, is memory playing tricks on me, or was somebody at Virgin who, for the purpose of this conversation, we could call you, working quite successfully to stop open access operators coming in on the West Coast under the old, what did they used to call it, moderation of competition thing? Or is my memory playing tricks?
No, it's not. So under something called PUG 2, which was the access agreement that Virgin Trains and Network Railtrack, as it was then, entered into in 1998, the application was made to the regulator for what's called moderation of competition protection. The logic for that was sound, in that there was a lot of investment going into the West Coast Main Line. Virgin was going to be paying a lot more in track access charges. And in 1997, 98, we didn't know then how the financing for the rolling stock would pan out. Now, in the end, it panned out in such a way that it was actually very advantageous to Virgin, but didn't know that then. But the access contract, PUG 2, included moderation of competition protection that meant that many open access operations were actually prevented from getting onto the West Coast Main Line. So it is slightly ironic that Virgin now talk about the power of competition when, admittedly, 30 years ago, quite a lot of effort went into preventing it.
Exactly what they're trying to do now.
Yeah, and I would say,
I know it was a long time ago,
different world,
but there is an irony and things.
But there is an irony.
What goes around comes around. Okay, it's worth just smiling ironically on as we pass on.
But your memory's very good. I'll give you that.
Well, it was a bit vague, but I was just thinking when Chris was talking, didn't Richard actually stop this? Not you personally, but I know you're part of the team. So is that it then, as far as open access applications on the West Coast are concerned? I see Virgin say in their statement that, for now, Virgin is focused on bringing much-needed competition to the cross-channel route by igniting a new era in international rail services for travellers on both sides of the channel. It sounds like they're packing up the tents and moving on, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, they say the very first words they say in that statement is "for now," right? But I can't. I mean, on the West Coast Main Line, I can't really see how the die is anything but pretty much cast now. And they're still very much in the channel, the cross-channel competition game. So we'll see what comes there. But yeah, I think for now, the West Coast, I think that's pretty much a decision. Yeah,
and I think we agree with ORR, don't we?
I agree with ORR Network Rail, and for the avoidance of doubt, for those who are already sort of frothing about the fact that Bowker's being anti-open access again, it has nothing to do with open access really. It's actually everything to do with the fact that we've got a railway on the West Coast Main Line that is practically full, right? And in the end, I think somebody had to say enough, enough. And sort out what we've got, which includes Avanti West Coast, by the way. That's still got to be addressed, but without the added complication of yet more challenges. Remember this, by the way, Nigel. This is an important point. The decision to cancel Phase 2A of HS2, which is another issue that will not go away, has actually made the outlook even worse. So the ORR say in this decision letter about West Coast, they say this: our view, the ORR, supports Network Rails, which is that the baseline service quantum through Handsacre Junction, the Handsacre Junction area, comprises 8 passenger and 4 freight services per hour, right? So that's Handsacre in sort of Staffordshire. The 8 passenger paths can be formed of any combination of HS2, conventional express, and conventional local services. While the train specification for HS2 is unconfirmed, this is the killer point. It is known that for every HS2 service introduced north of Birmingham on the conventional West Coast Main Line infrastructure, one existing service will have to be removed without infrastructure enhancements. I do hope every MP, well, everybody really, who objected to HS2 north of Handsacre and whose constituency the West Coast Main Line runs through is listening to that, because the ORR, of course, are quite right. Without a plan B, there is no plan.
And it's not a grade separated junction, is it? So it's going to be, in every operation is going to cause delay.
Well, Handsacre will, because it's the only way to get HS2 onto the West Coast Main Line. But of course, the challenge is there's just a physical constraint once you get north of Handsacre, Colwich is not grade separated, and maybe it could be, but that's what the ORR mean by infrastructure enhancement. But it means that for every HS2 services you want to put onto the West Coast Main Line, at the moment, you'd have to take something else off.
Take one out.
Yeah.
And the spat between ORR and DFT is carrying on. I see ORR replied to Richard Goodman's letter on June 20th with a missive of their own on July 3rd, 2025.
Yes, and they don't hold back in it either.
Don't they?
They say that they're going to continue with their decision-making on East Coast now. So having decided on West Coast, they've got East Coast to sort, unless the DFT write to the ORR by the 7th of July. So that's obviously in the past now, asking the ORR to delay the process for East Coast with the resulting impact that may have to the December 25 timetable. So yeah, quite a strop back.
Complex but important stuff. So has the ORR successfully pushed the DFT back, repelled borders, if you like, and asserted its authority in determining access applications?
Well, it's a really interesting question. That today, the ORR do have that power. There's no question about that. The ORR are the decision maker on directing access onto the network. No debate.
But for how long?
And have they demonstrated that here? Well, yeah, they kind of have, because they actually said no to the West, the Wrexham and Shropshire one that was actually a service that the DFT in principle had agreed to, as we said earlier, right? I wonder, this might be a slightly unfashionable view. I wonder whether the ORR slightly overplayed their hand a bit, because in the end, the DFT have got exactly what they wanted, which is, no more pressure on the West Coast Main Line. And the ORR sort of shot their bolt a bit, really. And I wonder what comes next. We'll see. The ORR may not care all that much, of course. But I think other open access operators, and I'm thinking particularly freight, do care. So it will be interesting to see what happens. In the end, the DFT got what they wanted, and I suppose that's all that really matters as far as they're concerned.
And I suppose all we can do at the minute is watch this very complex situation carefully, and we will return to it as appropriate.
Indeed.
Right, on to a curious story that appeared in the FT, the Financial Times, on Sunday, July 6, and it's to do with HS1, not HS2 for once. Whatever your views on HS2, the general view appears to be that HS1 was delivered on time and on budget and is by and large success. Yet the FT referred to a report by highly respected consultancy Steer Consulting, which suggested that it has not proved to be value for money at all. Now, since Steer Consulting was set up by Jim Steer, a strong advocate of high-speed rail over decades, really, and an influential voice in the original vision for HS2, I frowned a bit at this one, Richard.
Yeah, it did sort of feel a bit odd, didn't it? But when you do a bit of digging, you find out some interesting things. The report's over 2 years old, right? So it's actually dated, although it's been published in June 2025, it's actually dated April 2023.
Cool.
So, there's always that nagging down. Why now, right?
Yeah,
anyway, I don't know, but because it's now, at least we can read it. And the bad news is, I'm afraid, it's interesting, but I'm not convinced it's that exciting. And that line about poor value for money needs to be put in real context. I mean, first of all, the report makes it clear that its focus, the scope, what they were asked to look at, really is all about impacts in Kent, rather than, for instance, the massive regeneration impacts that HS1 definitely supported around St Pancras, the King's Cross Lands, Stratford International.
Around 20 times more than was forecast, if I recall.
Yeah, I mean, it had a massive impact. It's not all down to HS1, but it's still very important. It was also, this report, not intended to consider the still involving impacts of COVID and the pandemic.
Yeah.
So the evaluation that Steer did focused on the period from the opening of the railway till 2020. So it's actually already kind of 5 years out of date. Second, this is important. It's nerdy, but it's important. It's the second evaluation report. There was a first one, right? This is the second one. And this was done after the award of the concession for HS1. So the numbers in the cost side, which will have been determined by the regulator to enable the concessionaire to get a reasonable rate of return, will be perhaps different to what they were in the original business case. Now, that sounds a bit nerdy, but again, apples and pears sort of springs to mind. Now, third, importantness, there were no benefits I could find which could be attributed to the French and Belgian side. Now, I know you could argue, well, that's for them to decide, but nonetheless, the purpose of this line was to, as much as anything, improve connectivity between the European capitals. So that seems quite important. I couldn't find any real benefits relating to what the high-speed line, particularly the high-speed services within the UK, brought to London's successful bid to win and subsequently very successfully deliver the Olympic Games in 2012. And fifth, and I suppose finally, the report points out that passenger numbers have not been that as high on the high-speed line as perhaps people would have liked, and capacity is a bit underused, but of course that's now being addressed. So I hope this doesn't sound cheeky, but as important as understanding the change in passenger use data at Sittingbourne and Faversham Station, which is a big chart on somewhere, has been, I felt this report focused on a slightly too narrow a set of effects. What it did do was allowed the usual critics to sort of say, high-speed rail, overhyped benefit. This proves all the overhyped claims. I don't think it does at all. And actually, HS2, if that was the point of the criticism, is such a different project in terms of capacity release. I just don't think you can compare the two. So, as I say, interesting, not that exciting.
You said at the head, Richard, what was the timing about? To me, it's obvious. That headline, poor value for money, is intended to continue to undermine the HS2 case, but in a wider context. That's it.
Yeah.
On the subject of HS2, listeners will recall we recently discussed the announcement that the Secretary of State Heidi Alexander made in the House of Commons on HS2. Remember the litany of failure line? The interim report from Chief Executive Mark Wilde and the very important review by James Stewart into HS2 as a project. Now, we promise you something special, and I am delighted to say that Green Signals is delivering. Richard did a great job and managed to catch up with James Stewart himself recently and recorded an interview with him in the offices of the Railway Industry Association, which seems rather appropriate. It's brilliant stuff, the kind of thing you only get from Green Signals, we believe. We'll publish the full interview on Tuesday, the 15th of July at midday. But for now, here's a teaser to whet your appetite.
But one of the things you did say in the report, which I thought was really interesting, you talked about gold-plated design. And you said, look, in your opinion, there's a history of gold plating in railway projects in the UK, especially compared to international benchmarks. But there was a really interesting example used of the Colne Valley Viaduct, where you were discussing the impact on costs that the comments of the independent design panel may have perhaps inadvertently had. It says, the specimen design given to the designer responds to the aspiration for the design to reflect the international significance of the viaduct, a sympathetic and imaginative design for the local community, a suitable symbol of the country's future high speed. And you said the result for the Colne Valley Viaduct has been described to you as an iconic design. Are you kind of inferring there that really what they should have just said is, please build me a bridge?
So, first, it didn't come from the design part. That came from the hybrid bill.
That was from the hybrid bill.
That came from the select committee.
Right.
So I heard this phrase, iconic design, being used for the Colne Viaduct. Right. And I then thought, well, that's interesting. Where has it come from in the system?
Yeah.
Right. It didn't those. So the answer is that definitely the design committee, the advisory panel for design gave a view that, but what you've just read out, which I thought was the most compelling example I could find, is it came from the select committee in the hybrid bill process. But what was interesting is, okay, so this viaduct was described to me as iconic, and then I tried to say, well, where does this word iconic come from? I couldn't really find where it had come from in the system, and then I thought, I'm going to go a step further and look at whether it was challenged in any way in the governance process. And again, I could find, I'm not saying it's not there, but I could find no evidence that this design was ever really seriously challenged from a cost point of view in the governance process. I'm not saying it wasn't, but I couldn't find the evidence. So one of my key recommendations is that you should embed a challenge for design into the governance and also planning and environmental stuff. Yeah, I'm not, the Bat Tunnel is a good example because it's sort of so extreme. But the interesting thing I think about environmental stuff is it is to challenge it, you need someone very robust in the governance structure. And then you probably need to engage the whole of government because it's a whole government issue. But yeah, I mean, I've always had a view that we design to a higher spec and design not standard of it's a higher aesthetics. If you go to Spain and look around their metro stations, that it's grey concrete.
It is, but if you go to Portugal and look at Lisbon Oriente Station, that is a dramatic cathedral. I know Atocha Station, Madrid was kind of there before, wasn't it? But nonetheless, they're not averse to making design statements on key structures because there's a bit of kind of national pride in it, I guess, as well.
I was at a dinner the other night and someone said, so I thought something really interesting. He said in Formula One, you have a fixed budget, which you are not allowed to go over. And therefore the designers work within that fixed budget. Yeah, I think we do not do that on these sorts of projects.
I think that's touche. I think that's one or the.
Not my example. I thought it was a great example.
It is a great example. But you mentioned.
So don't forget to tune in to the full interview next week on the 15th. It's a belter. And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us. First of all, our thanks to RIA, the Railway Industry Association, our programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our media supporter. So a huge thank you to everyone who has left us a super thanks this week on YouTube. And you wonderful people are Bob Walsh, Staffordian, Stephen Davis, Callum Thorneloe, Chris Exley, Alan Kirkman, Andrew Seddon, John Kirkman, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, Graham Whitley, Alistair Rutledge, Graham Webster, CGR 5041 and Marion Bloom. Thanks ever so much, one and all, for those super thanks. They absolutely do make a big difference to us as we move towards sustainability, and we're incredibly grateful for all the support.
Indeed, and thanks also to our new gold and silver members, who are David Moore and Stephen Almond, who upgraded from bronze to silver. Now, one thing just did want to mention is an email that we received recently from a listener called Danny Marsh. And I thought it was worth mentioning this one.
It's great, isn't it?
He said, "Good evening, Nigel and Richard. I hope this is the best way to reach out. I'm working on slightly outdated information for reasons that will become clear. I'm an avid listener whilst working the twilight shifts, never leaving a new episode untouched for more than a day. However, I've fallen a bit behind." And he said, and he goes on to explain why.
It's great, isn't it?
"I do hope you've continued your listener world map. I suppose I'll find out soon enough. But you may be interested to know that I'm currently working my way through the backlog of episodes from on board a 212,000-ton container ship, one of the largest in the world. And so far, I've listened to episodes in Greece, Italy, France, Spain, the Gulf of Guinea, the Cape of Good Hope, the Southern Ocean, off the coast of Madagascar, and will be continuing to do so on my journey past Singapore up to the far north of China and on the return voyage home. Quite a way for a young Calder Valley lad." And then he said, "My father, Neil, is a very keen listener and a railwayman himself. He truly loves the podcast. I don't have much contact with him whilst I'm at sea, limited to an email every few days. I would be hugely grateful if you could give him a small shout out in a future episode. It would make him extremely happy." Well, we're absolutely delighted to do so. So thank you to Danny Marsh for listening literally around the world. And a big shout out to his father, Neil, for listening in. That was a great email to receive, wasn't it, Nigel?
Hello, Neil. It was absolutely brilliant. It's to hear that degree of commitment. 212,000 tons. I'm trying to figure out. I wonder how many boxes there are on there. Maybe Danny will email us again to tell us.
Yeah.
But
how many TEUs on that?
That's right. So, hello, Danny. Thank you for your support, and hello, Neil. Keep up the good work as a railwayman. Thank you for your service.
Well, you can see all our members, to whom we're very grateful, in the end credits of the show. If you're a gold or silver member, usual plea, do drop us an email to info@greensignals.org with your postal address so that we can send you your exclusive goodies.
We can. And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. This one looked pretty nasty from the pictures that emerged on social media. Over the last weekend, an Avanti West Coast Pendolino hit the buffers at Euston, quite literally, on July the 5th. We asked AWC, and this was all they were prepared to tell us at this point. Quote, "We can confirm that one of our Pendolino trains came into contact with the buffers. On platform 1 at very low speed, no injuries were sustained by passengers or crew." Okay. Just in passing, I hate it when they use things like came into contact. Just tell it as it is. You know,
Yeah,
don't make it
doesn't really tell us very much, that, because we could see from the pictures.
But it doesn't make a collision any less serious to say came into contact with the buffers, does it?
No. Well, we'll find out a bit more about that in due course, because I think there is obviously that really shouldn't be happening. Thanks to Sean Harris and Darren Chilvers for sending us this one. The operator of the Very Light Rail Innovation Centre in Dudley, the Black Country Innovative Manufacturing Organisation, has fallen into administration, which is obviously very sad. It's probably best known for being home to the Coventry Very Light Rail, or VLR, vehicle before it left the site to start testing in Coventry. Now, obviously that testing program is underway. So we asked Coventry City Council whether the news would have any impact on the VLR project there. And they sent us this statement from Councillor Jim O'Boyle, who's the Cabinet Member for Jobs, Regeneration and Climate Change. And he said, "We understand that the BCIMO has gone into administration and we are disappointed for the team in Dudley, but this will have no impact on Coventry Very Light Rail. No impact at all. It is absolutely business as usual for us. Following the really successful on-road trial in the city centre, the vehicle is now in Ulster for the next stage of development. While work is underway on the vehicle, work has also started on the next stage, which will see us lay an 800-metre section from the railway station to the University Technology Park on Puma Way. This will enable us to show how the vehicle can run in a live traffic environment. We expect to start constructing this longer section very soon." So very sad news, but no impact on the project.
Harry Kernahan sent this one to us, and it's a bit of a disappointing story about the Northumberland Line, unfortunately. Bedlington and Northumberland Park stations, two of the stations on the route that aren't yet open, have apparently been delayed now until 2026. We asked Northern to tell us more about this, and here's what they said. "We have been delighted so far with the success of the Northumberland Line since it opened in December and the number of passengers it's attracted. At Northern, we are facilitating and supporting the opening of Bedlington, Blythe, Bebbside and Northumberland Park. Lots of work has already taken place to overcome challenges and deliver what our passengers want on the Northumberland Line. We are working hard with the Council and other partners to ensure the remaining stations will open as quickly and as safely as possible." Northern also suggested that we ask Northumberland County Council for more details, so we did. And Council Leader Glenn Sanderson said dates for the remaining station openings are still to be finalised, with Bebbside the next to open in the coming months, followed by Northumberland Park and Bedlington. And while these final two station openings now look likely to open early next year, I would always rather be safe than sorry in promises. We have worked to overcome some huge engineering challenges, and I know everyone involved with this project is working incredibly hard to open all stations as quickly and safely as possible. And whilst construction work should be finalised in the autumn, there's still a complex regulatory process to undertake before the stations can be brought into service.
I get the engineering challenges, lots of mine workings in the area. Why is there a complex regulatory process?
I was going to ask
It's a station, right? Sorry. Get a bit cross about this stuff anyway.
So now not only are they hellish expensive, they're now difficult to manage, for goodness sake.
It does sometimes leave you scratching your head, doesn't it? This story was sent to us by Sean Morris Armitage and comes off the back of GB Rail Freight being announced as the operator for Belmond's new luxury Britannic Explorer train. The first trip from London to Penzance was due to take place last weekend. Sadly, it had to be cancelled because the train needed maintenance on the day it was due to leave. So the train headed to Southampton for repairs. instead of Penzance. Apparently, passengers had paid up to £50,000 for a 3-night stay if they chose a grand suite. Cheaper tickets were available at £16,000. You'd be pleased to know. The repairs mean that the July the 11th trip to the Lake District has also had to be cancelled. Belmond's acted exactly as you'd expect. They've done full refunds, including associated travel costs, etc., etc. And the train from London to Wales is due to depart on July 21st. It's a pity, but I have to say, I've seen the pictures of this. It is unbelievable. I mean, it is going to be fantastic. So, I'm sure there's some people disappointed, but wow, what a train. So fantastic.
It is. I've seen those pictures. I'm just frowning at needing maintenance on the day it was due to leave.
Yeah,
but
don't know, but they've they've done the right thing, and so we wish them well for the first trip to Wales.
So thanks to Peter Mugridge and John Kirkman, two very old friends, for this one, which many will also have seen on the news. A Eurostar train broke down in northern France on July the 6th. Causing more than 9 hours of delay for passengers. The train apparently came to a stop due to a power failure, and a rescue train had to be sent to collect the passengers from the tracks just outside Calais and take them the rest of the way to London. Eurostar has apologised for the incident and offered full refunds to customers who were affected, or a voucher worth 3 times their ticket value. Passengers were apparently stuck on board without aircon or working toilets for 4 hours before the rescue teams arrived, which must have been just horrible. The incident is, of course, being investigated by Eurostar to find out what occurred. One rather nice aspect of this story, though, Richard, apparently a UK folk band called Stornoway, I know we both like a bit of folk, was on the train, and they did an impromptu trackside gig to cheer up fellow stranded passengers. I have to ask, how does it take 4 hours to get to a train stranded outside Calais?
I don't know. I mean, there needs to be a full review into that. I need to understand it. Great that there was a bit of music. If there was an accordion involved, I'm not sure that would have cheered me up. But anyway, that's possibly not a helpful comment to make. I really do feel for the poor people who.
With apologies to all accordion players, not
really. Now, this is a really positive news story to have, Nigel, about GCRE, the Global Centre for Rail Excellence down in South Wales, working with Neath Port Talbot Council. They've announced plans for a new skills programme to help individuals that have been affected by the Tata job losses to find employment in the rail industry. It's really good. GCRE is hosting an access to rail engineering programme for 72 former steel workers in a 3-week training programme. They're working with leading rail suppliers in Wales to provide paid employment opportunities for individuals who successfully complete the training. Apparently, the plan is to support 16 cohorts of 12 trainees through the programme over the next 6 months, with the first cohort having already started this week. So well done, Simon. Well done, GCRE. That's a great initiative.
And that's the news roundup for this week. So if you'd like to send us any snippets of news, you can drop us an email at news@greensignals.org. We can't promise to read them all out, but the best ones we will, and we'll always name check it if it's yours. Now, we did have a listener last week who suggested, albeit very politely, that he was surprised we'd not included a specific story he was interested in, given how important it was. Problem is, there's now 30 to 40 stories a week, and it's growing, along with sometimes up to 100 emails every day. And inevitably, we cannot include everything. We have to be selective, and as regular readers will know, Stef and me have got quite a bit of experience of editing news, and we'll carry on doing just that. But please do keep the stories coming, as they really do help, and we'll use whatever we can.
Indeed so. And that means it's now time to do the quiz. Now, last week's question was this: which station do we see briefly in the pilot episode of the sitcom Porridge, where Fletcher is being escorted to the van by the warders? And the question had come from Ross Clark, one of our listeners. It was a very clever question because it talked about the sitcom pilot, not the movie. And it talked about where he's being escorted to the van, right? So if you said Wargrave, that was used, but it was used in the movie. And if you said St. Pancras, that was used, but that's where he was being led to the train to begin with. the station where he was led to the van was actually Ystrad Minnoch. I hope I've got that correct. I think it is, in South Wales. I think it's on the Rumney line. And the winner, randomly chosen from all the correct answers we had, there were many, was Stewart Ellinson.
Well done, Stewart.
So well done, Stewart. Indeed. If you could send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org, I'll get your mug sent out to you. I've just actually sent off a load today, so I'm virtually caught up, which is
He actually
good
answered
news.
the question on the paper, didn't he?
Yeah, it was spot on. I mean, many people got it, but St Pancras is seen, and in the movie you do see Wargrave, but we were not looking for those. So to this week's quiz question. Now, our good news story, which you're just about to do, Nigel, features a Class 55 Deltic, as everybody will hear shortly. So my question this week is this: what do a Class 55 Deltic locomotive, a Mini Cooper S, and a Supermarine Spitfire all have in common? If you think you know the answer to that, then please send the answer to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, July the 5th. It'll be July the 12th. I've got my dates wrong, right? And we'll put all the correct answers in a hat and select one at random. So it is, what's the connection? What do the following have in common? Class 55 Deltic, a Mini Cooper S, and a Supermarine Spitfire.
Well, that's got me scratching my head. I thought I might have an answer after the first two, but I shall wait and see with interest. Now, this is a real story of achievement to end on, Richard, and it's a privilege to tell the tale. 65-year-old LNER driver Mick Ingledew from Newcastle upon Tyne has retired after 46 years on the railway. Mick joined BR in January 1979 as a traction trainee. While he was working for the local council, a train driver parent of one of Mick's friends asked whether he'd thought about joining the railway. So he did, and he's never looked back. He started his career on the East Coast in the cabs of Deltics, his self-confessed favourites, and finished his career driving Azumas. Very different. Now, Mick was joined on his final trip by his daughter, Lisa, and his son, David. On his final day in the job, he made this great comment. He said, "The bookends of my career have been real highlights for me. In the 90s, GNER was a fantastic company to work for in the new era of privatisation, and I have loved working for LNER most recently. The people are wonderful. We are one big family, and I have the best view out of anyone from my office window. It's been a brilliant career, and I would do it all again." Well, thanks for your service, Mick, and Richard, Stef and I wish you a long and happy retirement.
We do. What a lovely comment to make. That's great.
Absolutely. And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, or if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if you really want to support us, find out about joining us as a member on YouTube or Patreon. But most importantly, join us again next week for this show, which will always be free. We'll see you then, and until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Enjoy the sunshine if you've still got it.